Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dave Morrison. I'm the Vice Chair of this Committee of Adjustment, but I will be chairing today's meeting, and I would like to call this meeting to order. I would like to start with the land acknowledgement. That we begin our meeting by recognizing the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of Canada as traditional stewards and caretakers of the land. We acknowledge that the town of Wasaga Beach is located within the boundaries of Treaty 18, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Teonatati, Wendat, and is the home of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples as part of an intricate nationhood that reaches across Turtle Island. At this time of truth and reconciliation, we welcome the opportunity to work together towards new understandings and new relationships and ask for guidance in all we do. With that in mind, I would now ask if there is a disclosure of any pecuniary interests of any members of this panel. If there are any, please say them now. Seeing none, we shall now move on. The adoption of the minutes. Adoption of the minutes of the May 17th, 2023 meeting. That the Committee of Adjustment consent adopts the minutes of the May 17th, 2023 meeting, and that file was presented to us. I'll take a motion to put it on the floor before taking questions. So moved. Second? So seconded, or whomever. Are there any questions arising from the minutes?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a question directed to the planner, I guess, that's here. The question I have is that during the session, we discussed with the owner of 104 Mosley that he's putting in this refrigeration unit. There was concerns about the sounds that's going to emanate from this particular unit. I was under the impression that we had, and he had agreed at the time, that he would build another enclosure around the existing manufacturer's enclosure, which would be something as simple as a 2x4 with some form of insulation and an exterior finishing. I'm still under the belief that we were in agreement there. And looking at the language in the conditions, I'm just concerned that it's not a bit ambiguous there as far as it reads that the drawings and specifications of the enclosure, including materials and insulation, are provided to the planning department for review. I'm just not so sure that could be just interpreted from the owner's point of view, that he's talking about the enclosure that the manufacturer sends to him, the actual casing itself and the insulation specifications, when in fact we asked and he agreed that he would build an additional 2x4 wall around that refrigeration unit. So I'm just concerned about that and ask for the planning to make an interpretation for us. Thank you.
Over to the planner.
Through the chair, and I appreciate the member's question with regards to the conditions of approval that were established during the previous meeting. I would say that the conditions were written and were established with the cooperation of committee. That's what I recall from the meeting. It was essentially committee's language that was inserted into the report. I would remind committee that a decision has been rendered with those conditions of approval, so now is not the time to change those conditions. If there is a concern with regards to the clearing of conditions, that's something that we can certainly talk about after this meeting, as the applicant has at least a year to fulfill the conditions that were imposed during the last meeting. Thank you.
Now I have a question. I hear what you're saying. One of those conditions was that the noise abatement component was to be satisfied to I believe, the bylaw enforcement. It's come to, I'm aware of the fact that this is already up and running. So when does the noise abatement condition get verified?
Through the chair, and I appreciate that question. This is something that we'll have to coordinate internally with both the planning and building department as well as bylaw enforcement to ensure that the clearing of conditions is fulfilled. At this time, it's my job and the Secretary Treasurer's job to ensure that those conditions are sufficiently cleared. And I would say it's only been a month, and the member technically has 1 year to fulfill the conditions of approval that were otherwise imposed during the last meeting.
Further, and then I promise I'm done. Does he have the right to have put this in place and run it perhaps without those noise abatements for that year?
Through the chair, technically, the applicant must fulfill the conditions of approval that were imposed during the last meeting as a part of that conditional approval for the application. So he should not be operating such a use without fulfilling those conditions to the satisfaction of planning staff.
Thank you.
Another question through the chair, please. I'd like to just ask the members if I can, if I'm not out of line here, but was it not our understanding that we got the specifications from the manufacturer, but there was an additional exterior 2x4 wall to be built around there to satisfy the noise as far as the neighbors go? Just an additional 2x4 wall. I believe that the owner was here and he agreed to that, but I don't see that in the language here. This is a bit, this is my just opinion. It looks a bit ambiguous that he could just show the manufacturers. So I'm asking the members, do we remember and agree that there was an additional 2x4 wall that was supposed to be built? Thank you.
If I can cut in for a moment, I think the planner was clear a moment ago that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the motion that is sitting in the minutes was what was passed and identified as the notice of decision. If we need, and that he's also suggested to discuss the clarification of that, we can do so after, not in the formal setting. But the reality is that that notice of decision has already been rendered and already gone out. And so the clarity of that language, perhaps there needs to be another discussion about when notices go out prior to minutes being approved, or however that may be, but that's not the discussion for now. So perhaps we can take that up later, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor of the minutes? Opposed? Passed. So I'd like to make everyone aware of the fact that there's a slight alteration in the agenda from what was originally distributed via email, at least to the members of the committee. I'm not sure what the public would have received. There are two files coming up. First, we've simply moved the order because there are two files that are going to be deferred at this point. So we'll take them separately, I'm assuming, because they're separate files. So we'll take the first one, which is application B1523 for 929 and 931 River Road East. Over to the planning staff.
Yep. So we can, so application B 1523, 929, 931 River Road East. The recommendation is that committee adjustment hereby defers the application from Zenka Straczynski. And over to you, Chair.
Okay, motion to defer. Can I have a mover? Mover, seconder? Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion about the deferment? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. The second deferment is application 2B 1823 88 and 176 Lions Court, the DOS Development Corp. I'll just simply read what it says. The motion that I'll be looking for reads that the Committee of Adjustment hereby defers the application from DOS Development Corp. Looking for a mover of that. Seeing one, I need a seconder down the far end. All right, any discussion from that? Motion carries. Later, I'll figure out whether the word I'm hunting for is deferral or deferment, but I'll worry about that later. All right, so now we're into the matters before us. Application B 2023, Joanna Crescent. I am assuming in this process that although there are three separate distinct applications, they're all dealing with the same crescent, and presumably we will vote on separate motions, gentlemen, when they come forward, but I think we can discuss all three of them at the same time. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to be asking someone from planning to outline this Is there someone from the audience representing either the owner, or is the owner here? Seeing not, all right, you are welcome to join us if you wished, but seeing that there's no one here representing them, I'll turn it over to our planning staff to introduce it. Okay, thank you.
So application B1923, B2023, and A1223, Plan 1700, Lot 57 on Joanne Crescent. Purpose and effect: an application has been submitted by Gurjeet Mahan on behalf of Edward Cabral, owner of the subject lands, provided as parts 1 to 3 shown on B1923 and B2023, existing land sketch. Application B1923 and B2023 both propose to create one lot for a total of 3 lots. So B2023, the portion of the property proposed to be severed as shown on B2023 severance sketch as provided as part 3 has a frontage of approximately 12.20 meters and along the east side of Joanne Crescent, a depth of approximately 32.05 meters and an area of approximately 385.90 square meters. The portion of the property to be retained on B2023 severance sketch as provided as Part 1 and Part 2 has a frontage of approximately 30 meters along the east side of Joanne Crescent and a depth of approximately 32.3 meters along the south side of Joanne Crescent and an area of approximately 992.2 square meters. B1923, the portion of the property to proposed to be severed as shown on B19 as shown, B1923 severance sketch provided as Part 2 has a frontage of approximately 12.20 meters along the east side of Joanne Crescent, depth of approximately 32.27 meters, and an area of approximately 388.3 square meters. The portion of the property to be retained as shown on B1923 severance sketch provided as Part 1 has a frontage of approximately 18.18 meters along the east side of Joanne Crescent, a depth of approximately 32.92 meters along the south side of Joanne Crescent, and an area of approximately 610.8 square meters. And application A1223, the application requests relief from Section 4, Residential Type 1, zone of the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and specifically they're looking for relief from Section 4.3.1A to permit a minimum lot area of 385.90 square meters for the proposed severed lands, Part 3 of consent application B2023, whereas 464.5 square meters is required. Section 4.3.1A to permit a minimum lot area of 388.3 square meters for the proposed severed lands, Part 2 of consent application B1923, whereas the lot area of 464 square meters is required. So comments, the Public Works Department does not oppose the applications. And NVCA, the NVCA has reviewed the proposed consent and minor variance based upon the mandate and policies under the Conservation Authorities Act. Given the comments that they have given, the NVCA has no objections. And WDI has received and reviewed the submitted plan proposal. This review, however, does not imply or any approval of the project or plan. The owner of the lot in question has contacted WDI to make a plan for servicing. Please note that these services have not yet been connected. So the recommendation for B2023 is number 1, that 5% parkland contribution as required by the Planning Act be paid as a requirement of the approval of the severance, the parcel severed. The determination of the parkland contribution will be based upon an appraisal prepared by an individual who is a member of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. Number 2, that the applicant provides a deposited reference plan, said reference plan to show all of the parcels to be severed. Number 3, that the applicant receive approval of minor variance application A1223 to address the deficient lot area for proposed Part 3. and that said minor variance is final and binding. Number 4, that all conditions of this decision be fulfilled and that the documents presented to the planning department for issuance of the certificate of consent within a period not to exceed 24 months from the date of decision. And recommendation for B1923, number 1 is that 5% of the parkland contribution as required by the Planning Act be paid as a requirement of the approval of the severance, the parcel severed. The determination of the parkland contribution will be based upon an appraisal prepared by an individual who's a member of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. Number 2, that the applicant provides a deposit reference plan. Said reference plan show all the parcels to be severed. That the severance sought by application B2023 be granted and the severance be completed. Number 4, that the applicant receive approval of minor variance application A1223 to address the deficient lot area for proposed Part 2, and that said minor variance is final and binding. Number 5, that all conditions of the decision be fulfilled and the documents presented to the planning department for issuance of certificate of consent within a period not to exceed 24 months from the date of decision. And recommendation for A1223 is that it's approved with the following conditions: that number 1, the development as related to the dimensions of the subject lots will be substantially consistent with the site plan and drawings provided with the application contained within Appendix 1 of the report, and that the severances sought by applications B19, B20 be granted, and that the severances be completed. And back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any members of the audience that would like to comment on this particular application or these particular applications? Seeing none, let's just pick the first motion. I think I know there are questions for this, but let's just take the first motion, which is to that the report be approved. So let's deal with B2023 first, because it's first on the agenda. Can I have a mover, please? Yep, a second. There we go. Thanks, Andy. All right. Are there any questions arising from this? I have one. Actually, I have a couple. I simply want to discuss the threshold for what is minor and what is not. Each of those 4 lots represent a 20% variance, which is a gift to the owner of the property. We're basically giving this person 80% of a lot through minor variances. And I'm wondering if that's a reasonable threshold. I mean, do we have a specified threshold? I realize that there's 4 conditions. I realize all the rest of those things. But I'm deeply concerned that this may be perhaps not an overuse in terms of comparing it to the neighborhood, but we're talking about land. I'm assuming that the Planning Act that's already been passed by council establishes minimum lots. I'm assuming that minimum is there for a reason. Perhaps a clarification would assist me.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So I just want to confirm in terms of your question, is there a threshold for minimum sized lots in the R1 zone? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So in the R1 zone, the minimum lot size is 464.5 square meters. However, when it comes to the minor variance applications, we have 4 tests as planners that we would base that off of. So we have, does it maintain the general intent of the official plan, the zoning bylaw? Is it desirable and appropriate for the development of the land? And then is it considered minor in nature? So when it comes to something being minor in nature, we wouldn't specifically look at like numbers, like it's this percentage smaller than what's regularly permitted. It's more so based on the impact of that development. Is the impact of what's being proposed considered minor in nature?
I understand that. So you're looking at the preponderance of the evidence over the 4 criteria as opposed to establishing thresholds for each criteria, correct?
So if I'm understanding correctly, when it does come to the minor variance applications, we would base our recommendations off of the 4 tests.
Okay, and I respect that, and with respect to the effort that's been made on this, and with an understanding of the answer to the question, I'll be voting no, because I think gifting this applicant 80% of a lot doesn't benefit the community in any way, shape, or form, and I believe that he should be meeting the minimums, so I'll be voting no. The motion is on the floor to approve this. I will not slow the proceedings with the next 2 motions to repeat my comments. So the motion for this one is on the floor. Absolutely, sure.
My major concern with this is the reduction in the lot size of 20%, which I would consider a major variance, or not a minor variance. So one of your tests is whether it's a minor variance or not. I guess from my perspective, it isn't. So I would say we should defer it and have the concept reevaluated or redesigned.
So is it your intention to amend the motion by putting on a motion to defer? Yes. Is there a seconder for the motion to defer?
So Chair, if you're changing the motion, or has the motion that was on the table, has that been voted on?
Amendments to the motion are usually in order, but if you'd prefer us to not consider the deferral until after, right now the motion is to approve, so presumably a motion to defer would take precedence, because if this motion passes, the deferral wouldn't be considered. But to be fair, in this instance, the deferral failed because there was no seconder for it. So it's kind of irrelevant at this point.
Yeah, so I would, so since nobody has, so I would say that you need to vote on the recommendation, and then,
Which
sorry,
were-
so I would say that you'd need to, sorry, Harold just put a motion on the floor then to defer the application?
I accepted it as an amendment to the
Okay.
original motion. But amendments have to be seconded, and I haven't seen someone seconding it. So with respect to Harold, I'm afraid it's going to die for lack of a seconder, okay? Okay, back to the original motion. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none. Those in favor of the recommendation on this one?
Sorry.
Those opposed? Those opposed? So is it possible to have 2 yeses, 1 no, and 2 abstentions? Are we allowed to abstain?
Good question.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but 2 people didn't put up their hands.
I'm sorry, I missed it because of my phone, sorry. I apologize. It was approval.
It was yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm trying to shut my phone.
Okay, so apparently I just didn't see people's hands. It's all good. The motion's approved. So moving to the second one, and we've already had much of the discussion. So, application B1923, Joanne Crescent, that the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application. I need a motion. I need that motion put on the floor. I see 1. I see 2. Do we need any further discussion? Those in favor? I see 4 yeses, and I will be voting no. And on to the last one, A1223, that the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application. And once again, the discussion's all been had before. I did have one quick question, and it's just a procedural one. In reading the reports, and I don't remember the exact wording because it's not relevant, because I'm pretty sure this is going to be approved, there was something about if we decided not to approve one of the other 2, that we should also not approve A, or why wasn't A done first if it was the linchpin one? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
So in terms of the way that it's laid out in the report, basically the consent applications were presented on the report first because they would first create the lots, whereas the minor variance application would then permit the lots to be a smaller size, so they kind of go hand in hand. So basically, if you were to approve the consent applications, in order for them to meet all their conditions, you would also have to approve the minor variance application as well.
So it was just a reminder to us that if we were going to mess with one of the first two, we really shouldn't be approving the last one either, right? Because the way they all went hand in hand, correct?
Basically, that they're all contingent on each other.
Okay. I believe the motion's on the floor. I believe we've had seconders and, or not? Do we have a mover and a seconder for this? Yes? No? Let's do it again. Do I have a mover for this? Both, thank you. All right, and once again, no further discussion, votes. All those in favor? 4 yeses, 1 no, and off we go. Application B1623, 38 Laidlaw Street, lots 29 and 30. There's another one below that, which is B1723. The actual motions, there's 2 for the same property because of the division, that the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application from TD Consulting. I'll now turn it over to the planning staff to describe what it's about.
Thank you, Chair. So application B1623 and B1723 for 38 Laidlaw Street. The purpose and effect: 2 consent applications have been submitted by the applicant, TD Consulting, Inc., on behalf of River Creek Development, Inc. The portion of the subject lands proposed to be severed, shown as severed Lot 1 on the severance sketch, has a frontage of approximately 12 meters and a depth of approximately 38.39 meters, and an area of approximately 465 square meters. The portion of the subject lands proposed to be retained on the parcel, to be the retained parcel, shown as retained lot on the severance sketch, has a frontage of 24.46 meters, a depth of approximately 38.3 meters, and an area of approximately 930.48 square meters. B1723, the portion of the subject lands proposed to be severed, shown as severed Lot 2 on the severance sketch, has a frontage of approximately 12 meters, a depth of approximately 38.3 meters, and an area of approximately 465 square meters. The portion of the subject lands proposed to be the retained parcel, shown as retained lot on the severance sketch, has a frontage of 12.45 meters, a depth of 38.2 meters, and an area of approximately 465.5 square meters. And the comments. Public Works and Engineering Department does not oppose of the proposed consent application. And the comments, the specific comments can be found within the Appendix 1 of the staff report. The subject lands are not located in the regulated area by the Conservation, Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, and WDNI does not oppose of the application. So the recommendations. So for B1623, number 1, so planning staff or the planning department supports the application B1623, subject to the following conditions being applied. Number 1, that 5% residential parkland contribution as required by the Planning Act be paid as a requirement of the approval of severance, the parcel severed. The determination of the parkland contribution will be based upon an appraisal prepared by an individual who is a member of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. Number 2, that the applicant provides a deposited reference plan, said reference plan to show all of the parcels to be severed. Number 3, that an overall lot grading plan is to be provided showing all 3 lots. Number 4, that the existing service locations to be shown on the above plan for severed lot number 1 and the retained lot. Number 5, the new 200 millimeter diameter sanitary cleanouts are to be provided for all sanitary services in accordance with the town standard drawing 12A. That all conditions of this decision be fulfilled and the documents presented to the planning department for issuance of certificate of consent within a period not to exceed 24 months. And for application B1723, the planning department supports the application subject to the following conditions. that 5%, number one, that 5% of the residential parkland contribution as required by the Planning Act to be paid as a requirement of the approval of severance, the parcel severed. The determination of the parkland contribution will be based upon an appraisal prepared by an individual who is a member of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. Number two, that the applicant provides a deposit reference plan, said reference plan to show all of the parcels to be severed. Number three, that an overall lot grading plan is to be provided showing all 3 lots. Number four, the existing service locations be shown on the above plan for severed lot number 1 and the retained lot. Number 5, that new 200 millimeter diameter sanitary cleanouts to be provided according to the town standard drawing 12A. That new water and sewer services provided to severed lot number 2 by a town approved contractor. And number 7, that all conditions of this decision be fulfilled and the documents presented to the planning department for issuance of certificate of consent within a period not to exceed 24 months from the date of decision. And back to you, Chair.
Thank you. So we'll deal with the motions actually separately. So the first motion that we'll be taking on the floor will be B1623, that the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application from TD Consulting Inc. For the property at 1338 Laidlaw. I need someone to move this. Harold, someone to second it. There. It's on the floor. Any discussion, questions? Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience for this particular application that would like to speak about it or anything? No? You're okay? All right. All in favor? Opposed? No one. Unanimously approved. Moving on to the second one, B1723, 38 Laidlaw, that the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application from TD Consulting Inc. I need a mover. Harold, Andy, is a seconder. Any further discussion or comment? All in favor? Any opposed? Unanimously. That was easy. Moving on. The next one is Oxbow Park Drive, numbers 836. Let me try this again. B2123, 836 Oxbow Park Drive. That the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application, and I'll hear about the details.
Thank you, Chair. Application B2123, 836 Oxbow Park Drive. The purpose and effect of the application. So an application was submitted by Nazareno Laboni and Lillian Garingo, owners of the subject lands. The application proposes to create 1 new lot for a total of 2 lots. The portion of the property to be severed, as shown on sketch provided as part 2, has a frontage of approximately 19.37 meters, a depth of approximately 45.72 meters, and an area of approximately 885.59 square meters. The portion of the property proposed to be retained, as shown on the sketch provided as part 1, has a frontage of approximately 22.39 meters and a depth of approximately 45.72 meters and an area of approximately 1,023.67 square meters. Public Works does not pose of the application or the request. And the MVCA has provided a clearance letter dated April 18th, 2023. Based on a pre-consultation meeting, the applicant had the Conservation Authority within. It is noted that the application has been reviewed by MVCA staff that based on an internal slope calculation, the subject site appears to be located outside the slope erosion hazard. MVCA engineering staff have no comments or concerns regarding the proposed severance. The MVCA clearance letter can be found as Appendix A of the staff report. The building department didn't have any comments, and WDI that notes that the applicant must contact WDI for the requirements of providing a new service to the lots in question. So the recommendations for B2123, Planning Department supports the application subject to the following conditions. That 5%, number 1, that 5% of the park, 5% that 5% parkland contribution as required by the Planning Act be paid as a requirement of the approval of the severance, the parcel severed. The determination of the parkland contribution will be based upon an appraisal prepared by an individual who is a member of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. Number 2, that the applicant provides a registered reference plan, said reference plan to show all of the parcels to be severed and all the parcels to be retained. Number 3, that the applicant apply for and obtain any necessary permits for the demolition and removal of the existing frame shed located on the proposed severed lands, Part 2. That it be demolished or removed, and that the applicant provide confirmation of its demolition and removal to the Town of Saga Beach Planning Department prior to the issuance of certificate of official. Number 4, that all conditions of this decision be fulfilled and the documents presented to the Planning Department for issuance of the certificate of consent within a period not to exceed 24 months from the date of decision. And back to you, Chair.
Thank you. So the motion that the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application for B2123, which is 836 Oxbow Park Drive. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Harold and George. Okay. And the motion's now on the floor. Is there anyone, sorry, I forgot to ask, is there anyone from the audience that wish to discuss this? You're okay with it as this? Okay. All right. So, again, the motion's on the floor. All those in favor? Nobody opposed? Unanimously approved. Okay. Moving on. There are 3 more to wrap up our day. D2223, 512 Golf Course Road. D2223, the same location, the same address at any rate, and B2423. And they all are coming with a recommendation that the Committee of Adjustment approves the application. So I would ask that we be walked through this.
Thank you, Chair. So applications B2223, B2323, and B2423, 512 Golf Course Road. 3 applications have been submitted by Antonio Mancuso on behalf of Huntington Investment Holdings, owner of the subject lands. The application cumulatively proposes 1 new lot addition boundary adjustment and 2 severances to enable the existing 2 residential building lots to be reconfigured to achieve a total of 4 residential building lots. B2223, the portion of the property proposed to be severed is for lot addition purposes shown on B2223 severance sketch provided as Part 3 and Part 4. Has a frontage of approximately 5.12 meters, a depth of approximately 103.88 meters, and an area of approximately 2,590.1 square meters. The portion of the property proposed to be retained shown on B2223 severance sketch provided as Part 1 and Part 2 has a frontage of approximately 34.54 meters, a depth of approximately 128.78 meters, and an area approximately 3,632.6 square meters. The property being enhanced through the lot addition boundary adjustment shown on B2223 severance sketch provided as Part 5 and Part 6 will result in a frontage of approximately 31.26 meters, a depth of approximately 125.78 meters, and an area of approximately 3,736.7 square meters. B2323, the portion of the property proposed to be severed as enhanced by the lot addition boundary adjustment proposed by application B2223 is proposed to be severed into 2 separate lots. The proposed severed lands shown as Part 3 and Part 5 on B2323 severance sketch has a frontage of approximately 17.25 meters, a depth of approximately 125.78 meters, and an area of approximately 1,817.5 square meters. The proposed retained lands shown as Part 4 and Part 6 on B2323 severance sketch as enhanced by the lot addition boundary adjustment proposed by application B2223 would have a frontage of approximately 14.01 meters, a depth of approximately 125.78 meters, and an area of approximately 1,919.2 square meters. B2423. The portion of the property proposed to be severed, shown as Part 1 on B2423 severance sketch provided, has a frontage of approximately 17.27 meters, a depth of approximately 128.78 meters, and an area of approximately 1,816.3 square meters. The portion of the property proposed to be retained, shown as Part 2 on B2423 severance sketch provided, has a frontage of approximately 17.27 meters, a depth of approximately 128.78 meters, an area of approximately 1,816.3 square meters. Comments. So Public Works does not oppose of the application. The NVCA, the subject lands are not regulated by the NVCA, and the applicant must, and for WDI, they note that the applicant must contact WDA for the requirements providing new services to the lot in question. So, we also have some comments from some neighbors. And, oh, sorry, I think that's actually a different one. So in consideration of the foregoing, based on the above, the Planning Department supports application B2223, subject to the following conditions being applied. That number one, that 5% parkland contribution as required by the Planning Act be paid as a requirement of the approval of the severance, the parcel severed. The determination of the parkland contribution will be based upon an appraisal prepared by an individual who is a member of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. Number two, that the applicant provides a registered plan, said reference plan, to show all of the parcels to be severed and all the parcels to be retained. Number three, that the applicant provide an overall lot grading and drainage plan showing the proposed building footprint setbacks within each lot as per the town's policy, prepared by a qualified professional for the severed and retained parcels to the satisfaction of the municipality. Number four, that the location of the existing services need to be verified and shown on the overall lot grading and drainage plan to ensure that the location does not conflict with the proposed property lines. If required to be relocated, the services would be required to maintain a minimum of 1.5 meters away from the property line. Number five, that the applicant provide municipal water and sanitary services to both severed and retained parcels in accordance with the town standards and policies. Number six, that the applicant apply for and obtain any necessary permits for the demolition, removal of the existing dwelling, frame shed, and 2 wood sheds, and they would be demolished, removed, and that they be demolished and removed, and that the applicant provide confirmation of the demolition, the confirmation that they've been demolished. Number seven, that the access to each individual separate conveyable parcel is severed and retained resulting from the consent applications comply with section 3.38 off-street parking requirements. Number eight, that all conditions of this decision be fulfilled and the documents presented to the Planning Department for issuance of the certificate of consent within a period not to exceed 24 months from the day of decision. And the Planning Department also supports application B2323, subject to the following conditions: that 5% parkland contribution as required by the Planning Act be paid as a requirement of the approval of the severance, the parcel severed. The determination of the parkland contribution will be based upon the appraisal prepared by an individual who is a member of the AIC. Number two, that the applicant provides a registered reference plan. Said reference plan show all of the parcels to be severed and the parcels to be retained. That the access to each individual, number three, that the access to each individual separately conveyable parcel severed and retained resulting from the consent application comply with section 3.38 of the zoning bylaw. Number four, that the applicant provides an overall lot grading and drainage plan as per the town's policy by a qualified professional. Number five, that the location of the existing services need to be verified and shown on the overall lot grading and drainage plan to ensure that the location does not conflict with the proposed property lines. If required to be relocated, the services would be required to maintain a minimum 1.5 meters away from the side property line. And number six, that the applicant provide municipal water and sanitary sewer services to both the severed and retained parcels in accordance with the town standards and policies. Number 7, that the application for consent, file B2223, be approved by Committee of Adjustment and that all conditions are fulfilled. And number 8, that all conditions of this decision be fulfilled and the documents presented to the Planning Department for issuance of the certificate of consent within a period not to exceed 24 months from the date of decision. And in consideration of the foregoing, based on the above, the Planning Department supports application B2423, subject to the following conditions being applied. Sorry, one moment. That 5%, number 1, that the 5% parkland contribution as required by the Planning Act be paid as a requirement of the approval of the severance, the parcel severed. The determination of the parkland contribution will be based upon the appraisal prepared by an individual who is a member of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. Number 2, that the applicant provides a registered reference plan, said reference plan to show all of the parcel to be severed and all the parcels to be retained. That the access to each individual separate conveyable parcel severed and retained resulting from the consent application comply with section 3.38 off-street parking requirements of the zoning bylaw. Number 4, that they're all overall lot grading and drainage plans show the proposed building footprint setbacks within each lot as per the town's policy prepared by a qualified professional for the land severed and for the severed and retained parcels to the satisfaction of the municipality. Number 5, that the location of the existing services need to be verified and shown on the overall lot grading and drainage plan to ensure that the location does not conflict with the proposed property lines. If required to be relocated, the services would be required to maintain a minimum 1.5 meters away from the side property line. Number 6, that the applicant provide municipal water and sanitary services to both severed and retained parcels in accordance with the town standards and policies. Number 7, that the application for consent, file B2323, be approved by the Committee of Adjustment and all conditions fulfilled. Number 8, that all conditions of this decision be fulfilled and the documents presented to the Planning Department for issuance of certificate of consent within a period not to exceed 24 months from the date of decision. And sorry, there was some comments from some neighbors as well. So we had, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, Bojan Shetkovich, Ivana D, Janet, Stephen, Maddie, and Ken Benoit. And so for this application, it says, so the subject was in opposition to the application for Committee of Adjustment files B22, 23, 23, 23, and B2423. And it says, Dear Adam Herod, Harold Van Gool, Andy Ferguson, Danielle Paul, Dave Morrison, Leo Kussmayer, Christy Wilson, and Andrea Taylor, writing this letter as a concerned resident to strongly oppose the proposed application submitted by Antonio Mancuso on behalf of Huntington Investment Holdings, owner of the subject lands, for the Committee of Adjustment file B22, 23, B23, 23, and B24, 23. After carefully reviewing the available information and considering Ontario property law, I've identified several significant concerns and objections that I believe must be addressed. So the first concern that he notes is the non-compliance with zoning regulations. It is evident that the proposed severances and lot additions do not comply with the zoning regulations outlined in the applicable municipal bylaws. The reconfiguration of the residential building lots to achieve a total of 4 residential building lots appears to be in direct violation of the density and setback requirements specified in the zoning bylaws. It is imperative to ensure that all development proposals adhere to the applicable zoning regulations to maintain the integrity of the planning framework and protect the rights and interests of all affected parties. The second was the negative impact on surrounding properties. There are significant concerns about the potential negative impact of the proposed severances and lot additions in the surrounding properties. The reduction in setbacks and increased density as depicted in the submitted sketches could lead to issues such as noise pollution, air pollution, overcrowding, compromise privacy, and decreased property values for neighboring properties. It is crucial to consider the rights and interests of adjacent property owners and the overall character of the neighborhood when evaluating such proposals. Environmental considerations. It is essential to assess the potential environmental impacts associated with the proposed severances and lot additions. Ontario property law emphasizes the need for sustainable development and protection of the natural environment. Therefore, through an environmental impact assessment a thorough environmental impact assessment should be conducted to evaluate potential risks, including impacts on the natural habitat, drainage patterns, and overall ecological balance of the area. Adequate mitigation measures should be proposed to ensure the preservation of the environment and comply with legal obligations. I appeal to you to consider alternatives that would not adversely affect protected, endangered, threatened, special concern species or habitat as per Clause 17(2)(c) of the Endangered Species Act. The species affected includes the pileated woodpecker and may include over 800 other species. Traffic safety concerns. Additionally, the proposed bylaw changes raise concerns about the creation of a dangerous traffic situation, considering the location of the crossroad of Marlwood Avenue and Golf Course Road. Considering there already exists a speed bump at fewer than 50 meters from the lots in question, the town has already taken steps to alleviate the existing traffic safety issues. Since this area already experiences significant traffic volumes and the increased density and potential changes in access points due to the proposed development may exacerbate the congestion, impair visibility, and compromise the safety of pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. It is essential to conduct a comprehensive traffic impact assessment to evaluate the potential risks and propose appropriate measures to ensure the safe movement of all road users. Public consultation process. Public consultation is a fundamental aspect of the planning process, allowing for the community input and ensuring transparency and accountability. It is crucial to provide ample opportunities for the public to review the application, ask questions, express concerns, and provide input. The available information suggests that the public consultation process may not have adequately fulfilled these requirements. Therefore, I strongly urge the Committee of Adjustment to extend the public consultation period, provide clearer information about the proposed changes, and organize a comprehensive public hearing to facilitate meaningful community engagement. Lack of ties to community. Another critical concern is the lack of any ties that Huntington Investment Holdings, Inc. and Mr. Mancuso have to our community. As stakeholders, we believe that the development proposals should prioritize individuals.
Recording stopped.
I actually don't know what that means. I know the words, but does that interfere with what we're doing at the moment?
So just the internet, the recording secretary has just indicated that the internet has gone down, so we'll just take a brief pause.
Okay.
And
We're assuming it comes back.
yeah, it should come back.
Does this happen regularly here?
Nope.
Okay.
Just a special. So 1 sec.
Recording in progress.
Thank you for your patience in waiting for that small hiccup in technology. We'll continue from where we were. You're up, Christie, with continuing neighbors' comments.
Yes, so I'll go back to lack of ties to the community. Another critical concern is that the lack of any ties that Huntington Investment Holdings, Inc. and Mr. Mancuso have to our community. As stakeholders, we believe that development proposals should prioritize individuals or entities that have a vested interest in understanding of the community's values and long-term well-being. The motivations of Huntington Investment Holdings, Inc. are surely primarily driven by profit, potentially disregarding the interests of those who seek more affordable housing options and a sustainable community. Considering the significant concerns and objections outlined above, I respectfully request that the Committee of Adjustment carefully evaluates and addresses the issues raised in the application for Committee of Adjustment file B2223, B2323, and B2423. It is crucial to ensure the compliance with the applicable zoning regulations, protect the rights and interests of the adjacent landowners, evaluate and mitigate potential environmental impacts, consider the lack of ties to the community, address traffic safety concerns, conduct a transparent and inclusive public consultation process. Furthermore, I appeal to the Committee of Adjustment to ensure that any decision made are consistent with the PPS and the current applicable bylaws. Any decision makers, it is important to consider the policies outlined in the PPS should be applied as an essential part of the land use planning decision-making process. While decision makers may consider other planning objectives and local circumstances, it is crucial to ensure consistency with the PPS to maintain effective land use planning. I trust that the Committee of Adjustment will conduct a thorough and unbiased evaluation of the application, considering the legal framework, planning principles, and rights and interests of all affected parties. I appreciate your attention to this matter and request updates on the status of the application. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Is that it for the neighbors'
Yes, so
concerns?
all of the neighbors, so all 5 of them, that was the same, they had the same comments.
Okay.
And I don't know if anyone's in the audience that would like to.
I'm about to ask that. So if you don't mind me asking, are you part of this? Pardon?
Janet there sent her own version, from what I understand.
Would you like to step up and give us further comments on that? So that was a very, I mean, if you'd like to, this is your opportunity to have that public consultation. We need your name and address for the record, please.
Sure, my name is Ivana Jurich, 496 Golf Course Road. My name is Ivana Jurich. I'm the owner of 496 Golf Course Road.
Thank you. Please express your comments as you please.
Honored council members and everyone present. Obviously, I'm here to oppose this application, or actually 3 applications to be exact. I urge you to look at the topographic map of where this property is. And the reasoning is it has to do with the setback. The fact is the property resides on the dune system. So I'm sure you're aware the beachfront dunes which extend into Wasaga Beach Provincial Park. And the neighbors and I were wondering how these setbacks are going to be achieved, considering so much of that property, although it seems huge, that the length is, what, 123.78 meters, how much of that is actually available where they're not going into the dunes. The other problem is the structure and the structural safety of the dunes is dependent on the trees in the area. So if the developer is going to, I don't know, raise the dunes, raise the trees, I don't know what their plans are because it's not specific enough. That's going to present a problem for the neighbor at 538, Steve. and it's going to create a problem for the structure of the dunes, which we're connected to as well. I want to add, there's an incredible variety of plants and animals in this really small area. And I'm just going to tell you about the critically endangered ones that exist on that property and on our properties. The first one is the rusty patch bumblebee. That's a critically endangered species. We have observed it many times. The fox snake, the drooping trillium, which again is a critically endangered species. The nodding pogonia, that's a small orchid that depends on the mycelial, I'm a horticulturalist, depends on the mycelial structure to get its energy, and that is definitely a protected species in Ontario. And I've sent contact emails, and that's why I also need more time in this application, at the very least, if you're not going to refuse it outright. So I'm in contact with the Conservation Authority because of the endangered species. I've contacted the Georgian Bay Land Trust as well. And because the fox snake has a huge impact in the First Nations, Beausoleil, who are the stewards and caretakers of the land, they may have an interest in the snake as well. So they've been contacted. And I just want to also add, insofar as the traffic impact assessment, the children's bus stop, the school bus stop is right there, which would be one of the, I guess, entries, or again, I don't know how they're planning to do the setback. I don't know where they're putting the entrances. So that will create more traffic there. And that also increases the need for the traffic assessment. Yeah, and I just want to say that it also has to do, the zoning issue has to do with the dunes themselves. If you look at section 312 and subsection 1 of the zoning bylaw, because of the septic systems, and again, the setback, it may create a structural issue as far as the dunes in the back are concerned. And also, to be honest, it's just ridiculous that some property buying person just walks in and then gets 5% of parkland for this already giant lot, so that's 15% on top of each. And I think that it's a bit ridiculous to consider this. Furthermore, these are what's called estate lots. We wanted to keep that integrity of that area, not to be sectioned off in a whole bunch of subdivisions. If we wanted to live in a subdivision, we would have not bought this, we would have bought in a subdivision. The subdivisions are across the street, they could be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Oh, sorry, yes, of course. If you have comments, come on up and join us. Please turn the mic on. I think it's still on, actually, and give us your name and address.
Ivana is my wife, but I work from home, so I spend more time on the property, so I look into it. So, dear council, thank you for time, for listening to my concerns. My concerns are similar to Ivana's, but I have other concerns. So first, the application that we read is quite long, but it omitted to advise the council that properties in all these applications, however they split or not split over there, are bordering the provincial park forest on one side. On the other side, they're bordering another forest, which is part of the golf course. Okay? If these severances are approved, new created properties will make a border between the park, these two forests. And during winter, one can see there is a traffic, animal traffic. I don't have cameras to photo it, but there are hundreds of animals. You see how they build the path through the deep snow, hundreds of them, to going from one side of whatever. And I mean, as I said, this is a very sensitive stuff. And these animals, why they're crossing? Because there across is the water. There is Provincial Park, Wasaga Provincial Park on one side. There is Mar Lake on the other side, where the animals go to breed, diversify their genes, eat, have food and water, right? We as a community, we do not benefit in any way except getting additional revenue for building permits. But this park in this area, this is our pyramids, this is our Parthenon, that our children will bring tourists in the future to see it and enjoy. Here are the facts. The applicant is a numbered company, registered outside of this company, outside of this community, for the sole existence to make profit. They still can make profit. Profit is okay. They can build whatever they're supposed to build there, but they want to build more, and that extra profit is what we are concerned of, because this extra profit causes damage. We have our bylaws and laws that we spend money and paid experts to be formed for the purpose. And here, for just like somebody to make extra profit and pocket extra money, greed, is just turning blind eyes to what we've done in the past and what our people wanted to do. So my main concerns also is this ecosystem. My wife managed the dunes. These dunes are 50% of these properties, 50%, okay? Any kind of building. I used to be a structural engineer. I know how it's hard to build. I know what they're gonna do with it. Okay, they'll destroy it. I know they're building it. There has to be a certain angle. That's gonna go deep, not just where the house and where is the end. It's gonna go deep. Tens of meters deeper. It's gonna be the soil, the very fragile sand will crumble. Okay? I'm not a biologist to provide this an environmental report here that would pass the scrutiny of a judge. I can tell you what I've seen with my own eyes, what lives there, what I've seen. And I've seen snakes. My wife, I don't know snakes. I mean, I wasn't born here. I probably know European snakes better but after 30 years here. I mean, I suspect that one of those two snakes that I've seen and my children saw is the, not rattlesnake, there's something similar to rattlesnake. Yeah. And we have one. We have one living under our house, our one snake, okay? Then we have this big parrot, the woodpecker, like a black, beautiful bird with a head. That's protected. I know, it's a pelleted. Is it pelleted? I believe. I'm not. Then there is bumblebees. Yeah, I know that lots of these bumblebees are protected. I'm not like ecologist. Then beside it, there's a traffic, blah, 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 and everything else that it is, what I said, number one is ecology and this ecosystem that we want to preserve for our children. So what we have this application that's posted 2 weeks. I actually saw it 4 or 5 days ago, because if I go to the city or whatever on the beach, I don't pass where they put, 2 weeks is not enough to address probably, I witnessed probably 10 different species that are protected. And we, community, we need time. We need time to identify them. We, community, need time to generate reports to this council and to give you a specific report why these applications can be approved. Okay? And I think that we need 4 seasons. 4 seasons. If we're going to collect evidence, we need 4 seasons, because there are lots of migratory animals. We need 4 seasons to sit there and record them. And then we need some time, I don't know, 6 months, to get experts to comment on them. And then this council will have a proper way to assess and make decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Or
for your...
destroy something. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. A couple points of clarification. Both of you mentioned us being the council. We're not the council. We're the Committee of Adjustment. We're people appointed to this by the council, so none of us are councilors. No, it's all good. I just wanted to clarify that. I don't want to take a job that I've not earned. In addition to that, I think it's important, and I want to say it beforehand because I have no idea how this is going to go, but it's important for you to realize that You do have the opportunity to appeal this decision if it ends up being done in favor. There's a number of steps you can go through at that point, just so that you're aware. And a number of the issues that you've brought up are actually not issues that can be directly considered by this committee. All right, we're dealing with a very narrow set of parameters with regard to variances in things such as the severances and questions like that. So there will be more discussion and questions moving forward. I simply want to make sure that you understand those 3 points. We're not the council, but second, but more importantly, that there are alternatives for you to appeal this should you wish to, and that the third thing is that some of the things you're asking us about are not our purview. Okay?
Point of clarification through the chair. I just want to make clear that third-party appeal rights do no longer apply to minor variances or consent applications in this instance.
I'm sorry, that I'm completely wrong. I assumed that.
So there's no chance to appeal the decision, is what you're saying?
Through the chair, as mentioned, as per recent legislative changes to the Planning Act, the right to appeal no longer applies to third parties for consent and minor variance applications.
So neighbors have no recourse once a decision is made. Is that what you're telling me?
Third parties as defined by the Planning Act.
I apologize. I was not aware. I mean, I was warned that a change had occurred. I wasn't aware it included immediately adjacent neighbors. So my apologies.
So then I would appeal to the committee.
Sorry, yeah.
Once again,
If we can't, this type of discussion we can't actually have. If you'd like to make a further comment, you're welcome to come up to the mic and make it. But because we're doing Zoom, we're out in sort of TV land, we can't have
I
conversations about the mic.
apologize. I just want to then appeal further that in light of this recent change in legislation, again, to, at the very least, give us some time and defer this application, or all 3 of them, as a matter of fact.
Thank you. And thank you for that clarification, because I wasn't wrong, and it happens quite regularly. All right, so once again, we'll put the first one on the floor. We're going to have 3 votes on 3 separate ones. Once we get one of the recommendations or one of the motions for one of them on the floor, we'll then have a discussion about it and ask whatever questions we need to. Are we good? No? Before the motion gets put on the floor? Yes. Okay, yep.
Through the chair to the planning. Does the town have any regulations when it comes to lot and grading as far as when you're backing onto a dune area, as far as retaining wall requirements and things like that? Has there been any precedent set in the past, given all the dunes and stuff that are in the town? Thank you.
Through the chair, and I thank the member for his question, with regards to any sort of lot grading requirements, that would specifically be regulated through the town's Public Works and Engineering Department.
I'm going to, at this
Thank you.
point, break into whatever questions are going to be asked and ask that a motion be put on the floor, and it's just the appropriate way to do things. I'm not cutting you off. We'll come back to that.
I'm good. I'm happy.
Okay. So can I have the motion for the first one? 2223. The existing motion, although we're welcome to change it if we wish, that the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application. Do I have someone to move that? He'll move it. Do I have a seconder? Harold. Okay. Now we can entertain discussion. Anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make from amongst the group? Harold?
Just to get clarification, this is an application for a consent. There is no building permit required. There's no building being put on, so the setbacks and all those type of things aren't even applicable in this application, if I'm correct?
Through the chair, and I thank the member for his question. So in this instance, there's 3 consent applications that have been submitted as one development proposal. Each consent application worked towards the cumulative development of 4 separately conveyable lots. So should committee decide to approve all 3 applications, in the end, there will be 4 separately conveyable lots, all of which comply with the lot frontage and lot area requirements outlined in the zoning bylaw. With regards to applicable setbacks, you are correct in that setbacks would apply for future buildings and structures on the property. As of now, there's existing structures that are needed to be removed as a condition of approval that were outlined in the staff report. But otherwise, with regards to the application before you today, there aren't any proposed new structures or buildings that would come pending the approval of these applications.
So the applicant still has to go through the building permit process if he plans to put buildings on the property.
Through the chair, that is correct. Should these lots be created and should they be developed in the future with buildings and structures, they would have to go through the building permit process, and as part of that process, they would have to clear the town's zoning requirements for those buildings and structures.
Is there an opportunity for the people in the audience to comment on the building permits or to be proactive in anticipation that buildings might go on that property?
Through the chair, where we typically see comments for building permit applications is when they're subject to a Planning Act application. So should there be a need for a minor variance or something of that nature, we would essentially be back here to discuss the merits of that particular request. But otherwise, to answer your question, typically neighbors wouldn't comment on a standard building permit should it otherwise comply with the zoning standards.
So theoretically, you could start working on anticipating that a building might go on there, talk to your counselor, I would say, if you have real concerns, and maybe approach it that way. Anticipating that maybe a building might go on the property, if there are environmental issues, because that is going to take some time.
Through the chair, I wasn't sure if that's a question for planning staff, but...
I think he was making a comment.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay,
I think
thank
he
you.
was making a comment for the general audience to be aware
Okay,
of.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's all.
Any other questions? Seems to be my day. I have a couple. Sorry. So, if the severances are granted and there are four, but first of all, I have to say, and this is probably my ignorance, or maybe it's just a really dense week in my brain, but I didn't understand 5 and 6. Like, I read all the documents, and I may have missed something, but, so on those sketches, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I understand that 5 joins 3 and 4 joins 6. I don't understand where 5 and 6 came from, unless they were originally a severed section. Is that, I'm making that up in my mind, but is that accurate?
Through the chair, and I think that's a great question. To be completely honest with you, I don't know the full history as to how those specific parts were created as part of the original plan. As part of the first application, so application B2223, they are to be added to part 4 and part 3 to essentially create essentially 2 new lots which would comply with the lot frontage and lot area requirements. But to answer your question, I don't have an answer in terms of how those parts were originally created at this time.
So my assumption, and I understand that you didn't work this file and you're covering for somebody and you're doing a good job in a difficult circumstance, I get it. But my assumption would be that if there were already 2 existing severed lots, that it would be 5, 6 might have been 1, and then the rest would have been 1, 2, 3, and 4 would have been 1 lot?
Through the chair, and I appreciate that question. There again, for the purpose of the history of these specific parts, I don't have that answer. With regards to the specific parts, for these lots to be developable, they would have to have frontage on a public road, and they would need to meet the frontage requirements of the zoning bylaw. So I don't know that they were specifically labeled as these parts for the purpose of having individual lots. I think they're simply labeled as numbers in the original plan of subdivision. But I can't speak to the technicalities of how that happens specifically.
Well, and I understand that, but there has to be a logic behind 5 and 6, and and it's something I noticed throughout this. If it's possible, I mean, this is the wrong venue for this, but an original diagram or something that shows where things are as they start would have helped make this clear. So I do have a couple additional questions. Given the state of is it true that in our community, a piece of property that is privately owned, the owner can go in at any time and clear cut that property if he chooses to, if they choose to? Am I correct?
Through the chair, for any sort of future development on a parcel that allows for such a thing, the applicant or the resident in this case would have to comply with municipal standards outlined in the tree bylaw. And that essentially outlines the regulations for any sort of tree cutting on an individual parcel. So that's not an outline in the zoning bylaw per se.
I understand that it's not a provision of this specific one. I'm also trying to get to the bottom of the idea. I mean, I observed through the process of investigating some of these other files that half of the property at Joanna Crescent has been clear-cut already. And so my assumption is that they must have the option to do that. So my concern is simply that they may very well lose that. Moving along from that, though, since there's a tree cutting thing they can look into, although it's not very aggressive or clear. With regard to lot coverage, is lot coverage based on the full size of the property or only the developable piece of it? Because they're quite correct in witnessing it today, that slope, unless they're going to dig it out, which I think there's huge problems with environmentally, and I think the province would have something to say about that. But I'm just wondering what the lot coverage regulations are when there is a part that's undevelopable.
Through the chair, and I appreciate that question. So in this case, the entirety of the subject lands are designated residential, so they do allow for residential development. The entirety of the subject lands are zoned residential type 1. So for the purpose of calculating the lot coverage requirements, it's my understanding that it would be the entirety of the parcel that would contribute to that requirement, as opposed to an individual section.
Thank you for that. I'm gathering information. They're quite correct in their observations about that curve. I was there this morning and almost got hit twice by cars coming around it because just parked on the side of the road. I did see the provision against that. But 4 driveways in that short space, all of which are on a blind curve. I was intrigued that the reports indicated that there were no concerns about that expressed by the department responsible. Did they provide any further clarification for that? Like, is there some plan to do something at that corner with Marwood across the street or something?
Through the chair, so when the driveways, so pending the approval of these applications, when the driveways are established, they would have to meet the engineering requirements through that specific department when the owners essentially apply for a road occupation permit. As a separate requirement, any driveways have to comply with section 3.38 in the town zoning bylaw, and that also outlines specific provisions in terms of dimensions and specifications for driveways. So as a condition of approval, what's been attached to this report is actually that all the entrances comply with that specific section of the zoning bylaw.
But were we to approve this, does that add weight to the creation of 4 driveways on a blind curve? Are we expected to consider the safety of those driveways?
Through the chair, and I appreciate that question. That is part of our assessment criteria when we do go through the official plan policies and zoning bylaw requirements. There are policies that speak to safe entrances to residential properties. This has been assessed by the planner who drafted the staff report, and he was satisfied with the configuration of the lots. As I said, the lots would also have to comply with engineering standards and zoning standards in order for the driveways to be established.
Thank you. Andy?
My only comment is in understanding some of the things that have changed, and and we have to look at all these applications that come in. But the recent change with the places to grow with the provincial government is they've changed a lot of the control. I shouldn't say control, the approval that municipalities used to have and didn't have. Now what they're doing is they're pushing this places to grow. So consequently, that's dictated by the province. So they come in and they're saying we're going to try and provide more housing for more people in these areas. And we can disagree.
Nothing to do with that. Sorry.
Well, okay.
We're not entering into discussion at this point. You've had your opportunity. All right, thank you.
I'm just trying to explain to where we are and the decisions we we have to consider all of the aspects that have been presented, and we do that. However, there is a guideline that this Places to Grow is to look at the possibilities, and when it comes to curves in the road and dangers, there's site conditions that they have to meet, and the town and the Works Department, they have all those things that they look at. So we can have an opinion and say, I could have an opinion and say, I don't like that curve, it's dangerous, it's this, it's that. But when it gets down to it, and that's why they have all the approvals in place, or the guidelines in place in each, whether it be the planning department, whether it be the building department, whether it be the roads department. And I think one of the things brought up here was in the report is that the Nottawasaga Conservation had no comments on this particular one. And we put it out to the different venues that have an opinion and say, how about this, how about this, how about this? So I understand your concerns, and I appreciate your concerns. And I understand the concerns about tree cutting, I understand all of that stuff. But when it comes down to it here, we really just, as a committee, we look at it and we say, does this fall in line of the Planning Act and what is going on? And then that's our decision. It is or it isn't. And it's not to be mean, it's not to be nasty, but I think sometimes we enter into these other discussions that everybody has an opinion, which is good. But the bottom line is we're subjected to these guidelines, and that's what it is. So if someone brings in something, we have to look at it, and if it meets the criteria of what's there, then we take a vote on it, and it goes from there. So I just wanted to, I've been through this planning, I've gone through this, I've lived through it, I've done it, and believe me, I know sometimes what it's like to have things go through that we don't necessarily like.
Thank you. Sure, of course.
To the chair, make a comment. I have some friends that live the second door west of the Marlwood entrance, and I think about a year ago, a car came off the road, went right through their fence. Now, if you go to the roads department, there was some study done. The neighbors were all asking for a light at that intersection, and it's getting busier all the time. I'm a member there, I golf there as well, and it is a very, very busy corner, but I would think that you might want to speak with the roads department and get some information from them. Thank you.
I have one further question. Would I be correct in assuming that these applications or these consents are not, once we create them, if we do, are not subject to site plan approval? Because site plan has separate rules, is my point.
Through the chair, you are correct in that for the purpose of the individual development of these individual residential parcels, they would not be subject to site plan control in this instance.
Fine. Thank you very much. Any further discussion, questions about anything? Okay, the motion has been put on the floor. All those in favor? 4 yes, 1 no. Second motion. Which is B 2323. Motion is that the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application from Antonio, whatever. Okay, someone to move it? Harold, Andy? We've had the discussion. Anything further? Seeing none, all in favor? 4-1 again. And the last one, 2423. That the Committee of Adjustment hereby approves the application from Antonio, Antonio Mancuso. Motion? To approve, all right. Moved by Andy, seconded. All right. Any further? Vote. Those in favor? And again, 4-1. Thank you. I believe that brings us to the end of our agenda. Motion to adjourn. Oh, next meeting. When is the next? Okay. The next meeting is scheduled for July 19th, 2023. Thank you.
And call the meeting time.
Oh, the meeting will now be adjourned at 3:31.